Well, welcome back to Hydro Mike and Hydro Coding. That didn't go so well. I'm Hydro Mike, and welcome back to Hydro Coding. Previously, we created a class called Square, gave it some attributes or some initial settings. We defined how we want this class of squares to be drawn. We created a variable called frog that takes on the attributes of this square class. And then we said, frog, I want you to draw to the screen every frame of the animation by what was defined in square. So remember, frog is now takes on the square attributes. So now I can access any of these attributes by typing frog.draw, frog.image, frog.rect. So on this episode, we are going to now create some variables that make our class more robust and reusable. Because like I said before, now if I created, let's just create a car, right? And we're going to say it equals the square class again, right? Cool beans, right? Now I want you to also car dot draw. What do you think is going to happen? It should draw a car to the screen, right? I mean, that's all we did to create a frog. That's all we should need to do to create a car, right? Absolutely right, right? But oh, there's only one. There's actually two there. But since we've hard coded variables in our class is pretty much useless. It only really works for one item because we're telling it to be 32 by 32, which in that it's not that big of a deal, right? I mean, it's Frogger, everything's about the same size, so that might not have been that big of a deal. But we also told them both to draw in the exact same spot. Well, if I change that in the class, then they both change. So, and I've told them both to fill in color green. So there's two there. But they are in the exact same spot. So how do we get around that? Is we create some variables, and we're going to start at the very beginning. Then we're going to go down, and we're going to figure out what in here that's hard-coded that we could probably make into a variable that make it easier to change, especially when it comes to our class. So we're going to start at the top. This screen here, 600 by 600. Right. Let's say a few days from now, right? I need to reference the screen width, right? Then I'd have to type in 600, right? And a little bit somewhere else in the code, I have to reference it again, 600, right? And then just before we finish the game, I decide I want the game width to be 800. What would I have to do? I would have to go everywhere that I wrote 600 in my code, when I was talking about the width of the screen anyway. I would have to go and individually change each one of those to 800, which would suck. So we create variables to hold this information. So if I do want to change that later, I just change it at the variable, and then everything else will change. Where I wrote that variable in the code, that variable will now equal the new number, and I'll show you what that means. So 600 by 600, right? We're going to create a variable for the height and the width. So we're going to say width equals 600, height equals 600, right? So instead of writing 600 by 600 here. We're going to just type in width. And height. Right? Now what did I do? On the surface, it did nothing. We still have our square that is 600 by 600 with our 2 green squares in the middle. But now if I want to change the size of the screen, like just imagine I've had to write this width down several times in our code, right? Instead of changing it everywhere, I would literally just go to my width right here, change it to an 8, and bam, now my screen's 800 by 600. And now this is a good way to point out another issue with hard coding numbers in, right? I've changed the width now to 800, but wait a minute, didn't we put our squares in the middle of the screen? Well, we did. We put them in the middle of the screen when our screen was 600 by 600. Now that we changed the size, nothing is scaling appropriately anymore, which would become a big problem later. Especially when you're almost done with your game and you decide to change it to 800, right? The game would be off 200 pixels. So we're going to change this back to 6 just because that's what we're going with right now. So there we go. We've taken care of width and height. Game title. Not saying we're going to change the game title. But let's say, so we're making the caption of our screen Frogger, right? Let's say in the middle of our game board somewhere we want it, your game board screen window, we want it to say Frogger, or maybe I don't know, maybe somewhere else you want it to write Frogger on your actual screen. And then again we get to the end and we're like, oh man, I don't want to call it Frogger, I want to call it Hippity Hop or whatever. Again, if I make a variable for this, when we go to create text, you have to create text in a certain way, and if I have to change that several times, it would get very annoying. So if I can use a variable for game title, if I do change my game title at any time, again, I would just have to change this one variable to update my game title anywhere that I decided to write Frogger. So we're going to do that again. Game title. And that underscore doesn't have to happen. That's just how it's done to distinguish a space. I can capitalize, I can do whatever I want, but this environment is, like I said, it's got the IntelliText that's trying to help me do it. It will give me useful but not useful hints. Like if I capitalize something, I can say, hey, you know, normally we don't do that in coding. We don't capitalize that. We only capitalize the name of your class and things like that, which get annoying. So I try to stay, you know, doing what the program says is right, which in the world of coding, I guess, is accepted. So game title, anyway, Frogger, right? That's what game title now equals. So now I just write in here the game title. Means the same thing, nothing has changed. Still says Frogger up at the top. But now if I changed it to anything else, my game title, anywhere that I wrote it, will update accordingly. Alright, enough with that. We're also going to have, for our clock, right, since that's the next thing, I'm going to have a variable, and I'm just going to call it FPS, frames per second, and we're going to have that equal 30. So now down here, I will just write FPS, which is holding 30, right? That's what the variable means. So now if I ever want to change the frames per second that the game is playing at, I just change it here, and I don't have to worry about if I referenced it or did it somewhere else down in the code later. I just got to change it in one spot, right? That's the whole point of variables, is allowing me to either hold information for use, or to hold information that I'm going to use many times. That way, if I decide to change that one thing, I change it in one spot. Okay, I think I've gone over that enough. Now, for the class, same exact idea, except for slightly different. Alright, so as far as the surface goes, right, so far we have them at 32 by 32. I didn't think I was recording for a second. In order to make this a variable inside of a class, and how we can access them from, like, my frog here, I'm creating it a square, but how do I distinguish this frog's location or size, since we're working on it, the size of the frog compared to the size of the car? How do we change those two? What we do is, in our initialization statement, we pass in what variables that we want each one of these to have, right? So I'm going to say, for now, geez, I'm going to sneeze. We are going to just say, I'm going to say W for width and H for height, right? I've just made those up. I'm saying the W equals width, H equals, they can be anything, but I'm calling them that because you always want to name things in some way that's easy to remember. So now, to make those usable, I have to say self.w equals W. And all that's saying is, now when I create the frog and I pass in this W, I can use it anywhere that I write self.w is using that information that I pass into it. And I'll explain more in a second. Self.h equals H. Right? So now what does that do for me? Now I'm going to put, instead of 32 by 32, I'm going to put self.w and self.h, right? So now what's that saying is, now this self.w equals W, self.h equals H. These two variables I'm going to pass in when creating my frog, or when I'm creating my car. And I'm telling this that self.w is going to equal that value, right? So now when I create my image, I create it at the size that I passed in W and the size I passed in H, right? Might not make sense, but we're going to do one more now. And I'll show you when I get to this. Now, there. So now I should be able to distinguish the sizes between each square that I create. And I will, like I said, I'll show you that in just a second, but we're going to do all the variables inside here first. So now the center X, right, and the center Y, these are the location that I'm saying I want my square drawn at. So again, let's just do X and a Y. Like I said, these are just things I'm making up. I mean, they're obviously, you can understand what they mean: width, height, X location, Y, by coordinates X and Y. So we're going to say self.x equals X, whatever the X information I pass in, and self.y equals whatever Y information I pass in, right? This information here is not actually, like, physically, I'm not passing in the letter W in. This is just a placeholder saying anything I do pass in this position is W and make self.w equal that, right? So now you can probably figure it out. My x and y, which are all going to be by its center x and center y, which should work. I may have to change that to just its x and y locations later. But like I said, this is the initialization. This is the first time the square is being drawn. This is where I want it to be. So we're going to say at self.x, right? And self.y. All right. So now we're down for color, right? Color can be done the exact same way, right? So our frog, we're just going to make the variables up here at the top because that's just what I like to do. We're going to say green. Green equals, right? And then we put that same RGB value in that we want green to be. We can make it anything we want, but we're going to make it the same bright green that we have. There's green, right? And we're going to have car too, but so we're going to make the car white just for now. So we're going to make a 255 by 255 by 255 is white in RGB, right? So now down here, right? So now we have to pass in a variable for the color as well. So you named it. We're going to make it a C. And again, we're going to do self.c equals C. And now I guess I could point out, I could be calling these self.width, self.height, self.x, or, you know, this name, like I said, remember, this is anything before an equal sign is just something I'm making up, a name I'm making up. I mean, inside a class, it has to have self.dot something, but right, so this could be self.width, self.height, self.blah blah blah x, whatever. But I don't need to. And like I said, they're just going to equal anything. Like the value I pass in this position will equal here. The value I pass in at this position will equal here, and so on and so forth, right? So now for its color, I'm just going to put self.c, right? Self.c equals the C that I pass in. And now let me explain to you what I mean by passing in, right? So at my frog here, I'm creating it, or I'm making it equal to a square class, right? So see now how I hover over it, and it said parameter C, H, W, X, and Y unfulfilled. Since I'm saying up here, when I create a square, I'm going to give you all of this information so you can use it in creating my square. So you don't worry about the self. The self just has to be there. But the first thing I had to pass in is its width. All right, my frog, I want it at 32. Oops. And its height at 32. Its width and height 32. So that's how big it is. And next is its x coordination, which is this center x. I want it in the center of the screen still, right? Now remember we made this width. So I don't have to say 300 anymore for in the center of the screen. I can say now width divided by 2, right? So the width of whatever size I make the screen, divide that by 2 and put the center of my frog's x right there, right? So now, just since I'm here, if I change this width to 800, my frog is just going to instantly go, okay, now width equals 800, divide that by 2, my frog is now at 400, my frog's x, right? So now I got to do its y. Where do I want its y? Now remember, I can't run it or it'll error out, but we can do it on here. the game windows, X and Y, 0, 0 is top left corner, right? X increases along the top, Y increases going down. So if I want it at the bottom of the screen, right, my height is 600. So the very bottom of the pixel is 600, right? So I could do height minus 32, right? So height minus 32 would be all the way at the bottom, because the height is equal to 600, so that'd be the very bottom of the screen, minus 32. Why minus 32? Because that is the height of my frog, right? I can say minus, we'll say minus 38. So there'll be a few empty pixels, you know, at the bottom of the screen, a couple pixels, and then our frog. Right? Does that make sense, I hope? Let's say, okay, so now the car, right? So the width of our frog, our car, let's make him double as long, right? He is going to be 64. 64 by 32, right? So he's going to be twice as long, but the same thickness, right? And where do we want him to be? Well, just for now, we are going to say he is at, we're going to say he's still in the center of the screen, just for now. So width divided by 2, right? Oh, I forgot one variable already too, the color. I forgot color. And then height divided by 2, right? So that should put him, the car, exactly in the center of the screen where we currently had the frog, or previously had the frog. I forgot to pass in the color. Our frog, right? We made the variable green. In the car, we wanted white, right? So that's how, by making one class called square, we now can create a frog, pass in these variables that we said we were going to up here, pass them in, so we're making some random self value equal to the values that I'm passing in, and then we're using those self values in appropriate spots inside of our class to help us so allows us to change certain numbers and things inside of our class. So we can create things that are squares, but alter them so they're different, if that makes sense, right? So we have our frog that should be in the middle of the screen, almost at the bottom, and our car that should be exactly in the middle of the screen. Frog's green, car's white. We're drawing our frog, we're drawing our car, we're updating it, so here we go. There we go. We will, we'll go to this one. There you go. We have a car that's directly in the center of the screen, and we have our frog that's in the center of the screen, but almost at the bottom. But in doing that, we used the same class for both of them, but we were able to create two objects, right? So, hey everybody, it's Hydro Mike. Just like last episode, I'm going to cut this video off. I started recording, and before I knew it, I was 60 minutes into it. So, I'm trying to keep each video around 30 minutes. So, you know, it's really hard, I know, to watch a video that's an hour long. I mean, I could do it even if it's dry because this type of thing interests me. But, you know, I'm trying to keep it for the beginner. I'm not trying to overwhelm a beginner because I'm a beginner too. But anyway, so this one we basically refactored our class. We created some new variables and made our class more robust and reusable. And I hope you can start to see that how later when it comes to making multiple cars, like now we can easily adjust their sizes, and when it comes to moving them individually, we don't have to write all that line of code for each car. We just wrote it once, we passed in a few variables, and that's all we need to do to distinguish any of our cars from any other cars and from our frog even. Right where this video cuts off, we start to go into moving our frog with the keyboard, so that'll be on the next video. But you'll see that at the beginning of the video I start struggle busting. I can't quite get straight in my head what I want to do, but I get there, and that's how I learn, and I find value in failing. I mean, if I fail at it, I'll remember it next time. Somewhat. I'll remember it better. How about that? And but I encourage you to go to python.org and learn about classes, or even just go to Pygame or python.org. I don't know if it's python.org, but just Google it. It's Python something. If you've gotten this far so far, then you've probably got Python already on your computer, and you know where to go to read about it. But yeah, and just go to Pygame even and just read about some things you can do with Pygame. Like I said, I'm just a couple weeks in myself from learning how to do this, so we'll see where we end up by the end of this. But as of right now, thank you for watching. I'm Hydro Mike. You've been watching Hydro Coding. Have a wonderful day. Later.